We are tonight in our books doing lesson number 7. And looking at it real quickly, because I think all of us recognize, especially those that are in the teaching profession, we get quite a few of those, and I think all of us recognize that repetition is really how we learn, and recognizing that, and I think that's one of the things that's important about this study also. Not only are we seeing the big picture, but that we repeat it. And I just want to go back for just a couple minutes to where we are so far, okay? Just to kind of, as we build it each and every week. The first lesson, of course, was on the just on the general part of the Bible, and so we'll just kind of let that one go. But the second lesson was entitled "Before Abraham Was." Do you remember what was that section of history? There was creation. There was the fall of mankind in chapter 3. What else was in that section? Yeah, the flood is there. And then after the flood, Tower of Babel. Okay? And so before Abraham, well, then the next thing is Abraham. And you have Abraham, and then his son, the promised son of Abraham was Isaac. And then his son, the promised one, was Jacob. And then Jacob had the 12 sons, which become the fathers of the tribes. One of those sons, Joseph, was sold into slavery and then ended up in prison, but then also ended up leading the nation. He, in the middle of the famine, brought his family down to Egypt. Approximately 400 years go by after he dies. And another Pharaoh rises up that doesn't remember Joseph. The Israelites are put into captivity, into slavery, and someone is born that is important. Who is that? Moses. And Moses lives, as we know, in Pharaoh's house as a son of Pharaoh's daughter for 40 years. And then he kills the Egyptian, and then he flees to the land of Midian for another 40 years. And he sees the burning bush, and God calls him to go back home. He goes back home, and he leads the Israelites out. And for the next about 40 years, Moses leads the people throughout the wilderness. Right about the time Moses dies, they mourn for Moses. And then immediately after that, Joshua leads the people across the Jordan River and take over the first city they come to. What is that first city they come to? Jericho. They come to Jericho, and then they spread out, and they overtake the land. It takes around 7 years or so. The book of Joshua is the coverage of that. At the end of that period, once they settle the land, Israel doesn't have a king. Israel doesn't have direction. And God gives them a group of individuals over the course of time that took care of them, and that was the judges. Okay? The judges take place over about 400 years. And the period of the judges ends with the final judge that God had, and that was Samuel. And Samuel is the one that anoints the first 2 kings of Israel that we're going to look at tonight, as in Saul and David. So do you follow me so far? If you can kind of walk through that, you're able to see that much of the Bible history. You right now, if you're able to mostly remember what I was saying, you're able to come up with the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and now we're in 1 Samuel tonight. So all those books are, I guess, summarized for you. So hopefully you're beginning to see what is the title of the book, The Big Picture, as far as the Bible goes. Tonight we're looking at the United Kingdom, and the reason why it's called the United Kingdom is next week the kingdom divides. And so it's that simple, and we'll cover the division next week and all the things that go with that. But the kingdom will divide into two parts. The northern kingdom is going to be called Israel. Okay, Israel's going to be the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom is going to be called Judah. Okay, and I admit there are times that I get that I will call Israel Judah, but in reality, you know, a lot of times we struggle with that. We call interchangeably, but I will try my best, especially next week, because Israel is the northern kingdom, and Judah is the southern kingdom. And because they are two separate entities that we'll deal with then. So, in the period of the Judges, and like I say, you come to the book of Samuel. Samuel becomes a prophet and a priest. He serves in the role of prophet and priest. And he was raised by Eli, the next to last of the priests. And Eli was not his father, but his mother Hannah took Samuel to Eli to raise him. And he does. Eli's own sons, you remember about them? Yeah, Hophni and Phinehas. They were wicked. They took bribes. They slept with women in front of the tent of meeting. They stole out of the treasury. They did a bunch of bad things. They were just bad characters all the way around. Had absolutely no respect for God and for God's things, and they died in battle, and they were killed and really acted poorly. And yeah, their father died from shock. He fell over backwards, broke his neck off of his chair when he heard about that. So yeah, that's true. Okay. When we look at chapter 8, 1 Samuel chapter 8, we find that Saul was anointed as king. And one thing I want to note, there's not enough time to really go through all of it, but just one thing to notice, that on our outline, if you got one of the outlines, the extra comments I've got, I did tonight, I did important things that kind of took place, or significant things out of each of the king's times. One of the things I would say about King Saul is that King Saul, he started out humble. When you look at the story, when you read the account of King Saul, he wanted to hide and not be anointed. He did not want to jump into the limelight. When Samuel first approached him, he said, "Why are you picking me? I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, which is a very small tribe, and my particular clan is a small one among the tribe of Benjamin." And so he was clearly humble, but it didn't take long for the power that he had in the kingship to go to his head, and it caused him. Okay, if you didn't get one of the outlines, Caden's got them, and if you'll just raise your hand, and Jensen's got some too, they'll bring you around one. But so Saul, had that, and then Saul also, he sinned on numerous occasions by doing things that kind of showed that lack of humility and that lack of respect for God. One of them was by offering a sacrifice when he was supposed to wait on Samuel to do it. Another time he was supposed to kill King Agag of the Amalekites, and he chose not to do that, and also chose to save their flocks instead of getting rid of them the way that God had said. Okay. Something else that took place during Saul's reign it isn't really Saul that's the primary figure, but it's probably the most famous event out of all that time frame, and that was when David killed Goliath. If you'll remember, Saul was the king, and when David said that he was going to go out and do that, that Saul wanted David to put on his armor and go out and fight against Goliath. Did you ever stop to think that that armor fit Saul? You know, Saul in the description was taller, bigger than all of the other people in his nation. And I realized that normally a king wouldn't do something like that. But, you know, all that armor that was supposed to be so good actually fit him. And the real kind of leader, the right kind of leader, is what David was. And, of course, that stuff was way too big for David. And David did not want that. He couldn't use it because he didn't know how to work with it. And it was also too big and heavy for him. And so, you know, we see that David went out to fight against him. And that's found in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Turn with me for just a couple minutes to 1 Samuel 17. And, you know, I think of all the things that shows you about David, that, you know, it kind of gives you that Goliath, the champion of the Philistines, was going out each and every day at the valley of Elah, and he each and every day would go out on the hillside and would call out to the Israelites to say, "Come out, bring out your best champion, and fight against me, and the one that wins will be the servant. Will rule over the one that loses." And so he made that challenge each and every day, and all the people were afraid. All of the Israelites were afraid, and they weren't sure what to do. And of course, it was in that time frame that Jesse, which was David's father, sent him with some gifts, some grain, some loaves, and different things and cheeses to take to his brothers, to their commander, and to benefit them, and then also to find out about how they were doing and what was going on with them. And so when you see that, it is, he comes up when Goliath comes out, and all the people are afraid except for David. David is ready to go out and fight against him. David is ready to go and destroy him. And we know about that. In verse 41, look at what it says here. You know, when David gets ready to go out against him, and, you know, after David says he can't wear the armor, it says in verse 40 that he goes and picks up 5 smooth stones to go out and go meet the Philistine. In verse 41 says the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. You know what it means to be ruddy? Usually ruddy in the older terms meant that you had red hair and or freckles. That's usually what that means. When Samuel went to anoint David and went to anoint him, it says that he had was ruddy, had beautiful eyes, and was handsome. Now, if you're looking for a warrior, and the first 3 things they say about you, he's got freckles, he's got beautiful eyes, and he's handsome. You know, why are you turning red, Ethan? Yeah, it kind of fits, doesn't it, the description? Yeah, I know. You know, somebody from pop culture that, now he's really red, you know, but somebody from pop culture that I've always thought of when I think of that is Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. You know, the little guy, of course, you know, and Andy Griffith, he was Opie Taylor. You know, the redheaded, you know, fair-complected young man that goes out to fight Goliath. You know, and then Goliath, we know, is about 10 feet tall, and you kind of can gather the scene of why the Philistine looks down at David, but yet it has nothing to do with the external appearances. It is what is within the heart. It is what is within David. And so, you know, it is what God says, of course, in the previous chapter, chapter 16, when God has Samuel anoint David, when Samuel sees his older brothers, and God says to him, it's not the outward appearance, but I look at the heart, that God looks at the heart. And so that was certainly the case for King David, is that what was inside of him was far more important than anything on the outside of him. And so, anyway, he goes out, and we know what happens, that he takes the sling and he hits Goliath in the forehead, and in so doing, it knocks Goliath down, and he goes and he takes Goliath's sword and he cuts off Goliath's head. Now, in the book, this is one thing that puzzles me, because I'm not sure where you got this, and so I'm kind of curious on it. At the top of page 81, the author calls David a 19-year-old shepherd boy, and I'm not sure where he got that and what came up with that. I do believe he was a teenager. I do think that's about what age he was, but I'm not sure. With everything I've ever read and studied, I don't know where the 19 years old comes from. But I think clearly he's old enough that he goes off with his father, sends him on a multi-day task to go see his oldest brothers and to take those gifts. And you would not send a 5-year-old out to do that. And they made fun of him. So he was clearly a child or a kid, teenager. And in that day and time, the fighting men usually were 20 and up. So I think clearly he was below that, but I don't know exactly as far as what age he was. Kevin?
I think verse 29 is a great lesson for all of us. And when he says, is there not a cause? I mean, the entire army of Israel was scared their God was being ridiculed.
Right. He is
the only one that saw it and stood up to him.
Right. He was determined, this is not right. God cannot be treated that way, especially by this uncircumcised Philistine. There's a lot of great lessons there. It's been a year or so, but I did a sermon one Sunday night about this, about what happened there on the battlefield. And if you remember, I made all my points about everybody else on the battlefield but David and Goliath. And one of them was Saul. Saul should have been the one because his armor fit. Also, when David goes to cut Goliath's head off, did you remember what it said in the text when they come out? That the armor bearer for Goliath goes ahead of him. Goliath has another person who has to be a big guy. If you are the armor bearer and holding a shield for Goliath, you've got to be big. I mean, you don't want somebody 10 feet tall and then somebody, 5 feet tall holding the shield for him. You've got to have a pretty good sized fella up there to guard such a guy. And so where was that armor bearer when David took Goliath's sword and cut his head off? Well, you've got to trust who has your back. And whoever that armor bearer wasn't trustworthy to be watching over Goliath. Yeah, and he took some kind of cut. And so anyway, there are a lot of things there and how people reacted. To the Israelites' credit, they jumped in and chased off the Philistines and won the battle that day. and defeated them. It was that the origin of David killing his 10,000s came out of. Okay, David is the king, and during David's reign, some of the things on there that are important. We know about David being, that David wrote a majority of the Psalms. He did not write all the Psalms. Usually the Psalms have at the listing who wrote them. There were some that Asaph wrote. Asaph probably wrote the most of them. Asaph was apparently David's chief musician. And Solomon wrote one of them, and there's a few others that throughout. But by and large, we attribute the book of Psalms to King David. And like I say, he wrote the most of them. It was amounted to the Hebrew songbook. And, you know, a lot of our songs today come from words that David wrote. We adapt a lot of them. A lot of them you may not even realize, but they are, many of the songs in our book come from the Psalms themselves. We probably all know about David's sin with Bathsheba and how that he, committed adultery with her, had her husband killed, Uriah, how he tried to cover that up, and, we know about how Nathan the prophet came to him and confronted him about his sin. Really, the whole rest of David's life is living out the consequences of that mistake, or those mistakes. And so he certainly paid dearly. The people of Israel paid dearly, and his family paid dearly for the things that he did. The last of the reigns was Solomon. And Solomon, the two big things with Solomon, one of them was that the temple was built during his reign. David wanted to build a temple for God, for the Ark of the Covenant, for God's presence. God didn't allow him, but instead said, your son can do that. And Solomon did and built that because Solomon was a peaceful king, and David had been a man of war and had shed a lot of blood. The other thing that is important, we usually mention that Solomon had 700 wives as a side note. It actually is a big part of the story. The reason why is those aren't just 700 wives. The 700 wives were foreign wives of other nations. What a lot of times they did is, there are two countries, and they're trying to make a peace treaty. And part of how they would seal the deal is they would often send a princess to the person they were sealing the deal with. Now, that's not a way that we want to think about marriage and life going today. But those 700 wives that Solomon got, of the foreign wives, were all women of nobility from other nations that he acquired one way or another through those various kinds of peace treaties or whatever, or of taking over nations. Well, if you sign a peace treaty, you're probably not going to go and fight against a nation where you have a daughter that is a part of that nation. So you can see why the advantages of that. It was a strategic political move more than anything else. Why it is so significant, other than just a side note, is this. Solomon allowed all of those wives from the foreign nations to bring their culture and especially bring their gods to the land. And so almost immediately into Israel's history, you have all of these representatives of foreign deities, and Solomon also allowed them, in many instances, to have built high places and worship places for each of those foreign gods. And so what happened is the people began to choose some of those gods, not just those wives of his, but they would choose some of those foreign gods to follow. And so Solomon, in his this is a place where he wasn't wise, and having those wives come in and then bringing in their idolatry, it became eventually the undoing of Israel. And so the seeds, if you will, that finally destroyed them as a nation, had them taken in, the northern kingdom destroyed and the southern kingdom taken into captivity, was their bringing in idolatry. And that started very early on with the third king of Solomon. And, Solomon was what I would call a bucket of contradictions. He could at one point be the individual that wrote Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon, but did something as unwise as bringing in the idolatry. And you see that story a little bit in the book of Ecclesiastes. And of course, we'll look at those individual books later on. But if you remember, the book of Ecclesiastes is his search for happiness all the way through the book, and he can't find it until you come to the very last couple verses, and he says, I've come to the conclusion that to fear God and keep His commandments, that's the whole duty of man. And so, it does not take long for the kingdom to come to problems. And of course, it really fulfills why God said, you don't want a king. It's not what you expect it to be. And so, anyway, one thing to note, each of those three reigns lasted approximately 40 years. So the period of the United Kingdom was about 120 years. Any questions or comments on the story itself, the things there? The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel are the ones largely covered. Something to note, Samuel dies in 1 Samuel. And so it's kind of in doubt as to who wrote the whole book of Samuel, whether it was one of the scribes or whomever in that day. But Samuel dies in chapter 25 of 1 Samuel. And so clearly when he dies in chapter 25 of 1 Samuel, he's not there to write the rest of it. And, I really want, this is something I want to kind of maybe just to whet your appetite. I really want to do a series on this section of history. This to me is one of the most fascinating and fun parts of all of the Old Testament history. There's just some really amazing lessons you can get out of the lives of King Saul, King David in particular, King Saul and King David. One of the most interesting, intriguing things you're going to find in the entire Bible is in chapter 28 when Saul goes to a witch to inquire of Samuel. He has this witch conjure up in what amounts to a seance to bring Samuel back from the dead. And guess what? Samuel comes back and speaks to him.
And it scared her.
Oh, you better believe it, because she probably didn't believe it was going to happen. And so that's all I'll say about it. So if you've not ever read that or don't remember that, that is just one of the most, that looks like something out of a Star Wars movie, to tell you the truth. And it's indoors where she's from. And of course, that's the planet that the Ewoks live on, by the way. Don't mix that up with your theology, though. But the Ewoks are the little furry creatures in Star Wars. Anyway.
Don't you think that David made a great impression on his brothers, but the other soldiers there, when he said, I'll go fight.
Oh, yes.
He goes and he does it.
Oh, yes.
But he knew God was with him.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's.
I imagine some of the rest of them probably coupled up and
Yeah.
changed their attitude.
Oh, yeah. But I do want to do a series on that, and I don't know whether I'll do it in the Bible class or do it as a sermon series or whatever. But that's something I have in the back of my mind and I want to do, and that's on my wish list, my bucket wish list to preach through and teach through, and maybe the next year or so. Mark?
3 short comments. Number one, appreciate that Samuel per capita was the richest man ever on the face of the earth.
You mean Solomon?
Solomon, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The richest man ever with the temple and everything and all the things made of gold.
He was a billionaire
Oh,
without inflation.
yeah. And
If you look in 1 Kings 10 at the list of the stuff he had, he made in the billions back then. Okay? So that without the inflation of it. Yeah, it's just crazy.
And he had experienced every sin known to man. And at the end of the day, when he wrote Ecclesiastes, is when he came to the epiphany that all of it was vanity.
Right.
And it was only God, the intangibles that God teaches you that meant anything.
Right.
2 other comments very shortly. Saul, one of the axioms that I always remember when I read about him is that any man can stand adversity, but if you want to trust his true character, give him power.
Oh, yes.
He trusted God implicitly at the beginning and then began to swell up and think that it was he that was conquering all these people. And David, the biggest thing with David is he truly trusted in God and trusted that God would lead him to defeat Goliath, but was he not thinking outside the box? The box was created by God as well as by laws of country to those who need those rules to play by.
Yeah.
But he thought outside the box and knew that that giant could not defeat him. With God with him and with that stone, there was nobody in either camp that gave him a chance.
Right. Yeah. And anytime there's a very there's a out of balance matchup, we call it a David and Goliath matchup. But people forget that David actually won. You know, I don't remember who said the quote. Maybe somebody here does. It is a very famous quote that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay? You follow that? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It is definitely.
What is the significance of the round stone?
The round stones? My belief is the round stones would fly better. If you've ever tried to skip a rock that's not round,
The flat ones would curve.
yeah, they would curve, and so. Okay, that's one of our questions later. We'll just sit on that for about 10 minutes, okay, Lois? We're going to talk about why he chose 5, because that is one of our questions. And, yeah, he killed him with one. Oh yeah, of course God was behind that stone. But we'll talk about why 5 of them here in a little bit. Okay.
Then that Randy King reloaded them too.
Oh, let's don't go there. Yeah, one shot. Yeah, one shot wonder. Yeah. All right, let's go to the page 87. All right. We often skip over these, but we're doing a little better tonight on time than we often do. Can I get the middle schoolers in particular, the ones that usually do that? Which one relates to Samuel? Which one is that? Stephen? H. Okay. Samuel is the man who anointed the first 2 kings of Israel. Yes. Okay. Number 2, king. Francie? L. Okay. That is what the Israelites wanted to rule them instead of a judge. That's right. Number 3, Jensen? A. Number 3A, the 3rd king of the United Kingdom. Yes, that's Solomon. Number 4, Goliath. Brody? Is C. And that is the Philistine champion who was killed by David. All right. Number 5, Bathsheba. Caden? Yes, that is the mother of Solomon. Which Yeah, she is the mother of Solomon, but that's not the. But that, which letter is that? J. Yeah, the mother of Solomon. Yep, that's the right one. All right, 6, Saul. Stephen? Is F, the first king of Israel? Yes. Number 7, Jerusalem. Okay, Jensen again. Is E? Yes, David's capital. Number 8, Brody. Is I? Nathan is the prophet who confronted David about his adultery. Yes. Number 9, Mount Gilboa. Caden? Is B? It's the location of the battle, the Philistines, in which Saul died. It's also where Jonathan and his brothers died as well. Number 10, David. Stephen? Is K, the second king of the United Kingdom? Yes. Number 11, Francie? G is Saul's son and David's best friend, Jonathan. And just a quick note about Jonathan. You know, Jonathan was the oldest son of the king. In almost every culture, in almost every circumstance, that is the recognized individual who is to be the next king. And when you look at the life of Jonathan, Jonathan probably would have made a good king. Jonathan's actions, and Jonathan's another one of those stories that comes in there. Jonathan, the things that Jonathan does throughout his life are a lot more king-like than his dad. And it seems like Jonathan had the integrity that his dad would have done well to have had. And I think it was a lot of that as to why David and Jonathan worked well together. And so Jonathan, was the one that probably would have been king in almost every circumstance. And that's what makes it so remarkable that he was David's great friend. That there doesn't appear to be any envy or jealousy on Jonathan's part, because he is helping the individual that's going to take the throne, when by almost all accounts that should have been Jonathan's role when Saul died. But we recognize that Saul and Jonathan died in the same battle. But anyway, it says a lot about Jonathan. Okay, the last one, 12, a man after God's own heart, Jensen, is what? D, a phrase used to describe the character of David. Yes, certainly so. All right, everybody on these, to fill in the blanks. What firmly established Samuel as a prophet of the Lord in the eyes of the people? Okay, God spoke to him. It's when he was a young man. It's when God comes to him in the middle of the night and speaks to him, and the word gets out that he had prophesied to him about what was going to happen to Eli and his sons, and so. Okay, Saul was supposed to kill King Agag, the Amalekite, but spared him instead. Who killed him and how? Samuel did, and what did he do? Hacked him up, yeah. Yeah. And that's Samuel, the righteous individual doing what's right in that. But yeah. Number 3, at first Saul wanted David to use what to fight Goliath? His sword and armor, his stuff. What happened to make Saul realize that David was going to be a successor to the throne? Yeah, when he killed Goliath and the people began to say, Saul has killed his thousands and David has killed his 10,000s. Okay. Even though he didn't kill one. But that day, the Israelites overthrew the Philistines and 10,000s were killed, but it was because of David's prompting. But yeah, he technically had only killed one. But he was a big one, okay? You got to grant that. If you're going to kill one, somebody that's 10 feet tall is a good one. If he's, 6 cubits in a span, that's roughly 9'9". 9'9". If he had a fro, he'd touch a rim of a basketball goal. If he had a little bit of hair. So, anyway, Saul, David, and Solomon reigned 40 years each. Makes the United Kingdom how long? 120 years. Okay. David was the youngest of 8 brothers. According to 1 Samuel 16:23, what instrument did David play for Saul? A lyre or a harp, yeah. David cut off Goliath's head with, Goliath's own sword. When the women of Israel sang, David has slain his 10,000s, how many people had he actually killed at that point in time? 1. Which book of the Bible did Solomon write? All the above. He wrote all 3 of those. Jesus was a direct descendant of David. Okay. David established what city as his capital? Jerusalem. And then now the discussion questions. The Israelites told Samuel, now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. By making this request, they rejected God as their real king and revealed that they wanted to be just like everyone else. When we today reject God in an effort to be popular, what do we reveal about ourselves? Stephen? Right. It's more important for us to be like everybody else than to follow God. We're revealing that we're just like them. And that's exactly right. We need to make sure that we don't be like everybody else. Number 2, if David only needed 1 stone to kill Goliath, why did he take 5 with him? Was this a demonstration of the lack of faith on David's part? Why or not? And I don't think it was faulty reloading or anything like that either. Well, why do you suppose? Anybody want to throw an idea? Jamie? I think that's a good answer. He's prepared. And we don't know that he specifically was told. Kevin?
There was some ancient law about killing relatives, too.
Yes, and apparently Goliath had some brothers that were possibly there. And so I've heard it proposed by a preacher too that Goliath had some brothers, and those likely were just in case the brothers came out to play as well. And so I think it's somewhere along those lines of being prepared and recognizing that there may be others that come to fight. Trust me, if you're going to kill somebody that big and still do it with 5 stones, that's still pretty amazing. That's still something God is with. You know, God was in that. You know, he used 1 stone, and that stone met its mark, and David cut his head off. The stone actually just simply immobilized him. The sword is really what did the killing per se. Tom? That's true. That's very true. Yeah, and the author, I think, is just asking questions to get us to think about it and talk about it. Clearly, I don't believe it's a lack of faith on David's part. That's something that I don't think, and I think the author is also indicating that as well. Robin? Well, it may have been his normal amount to have with him, but certainly the sling was what he was used to, and you know, 1 weapon you're used to is way better than something you're not. And Andy?
I look at it this way: we all have to go into battle every day against evil, and the Lord wants us to prepare ourselves for the best we can to win the victory with the weapons He's given us. And we prepare as best we can, and where we lack in preparation is where the Lord will give us the victory, because we have done all we can do, and the Lord will pick up the rest.
Right. Yeah.
We got into the Bible just like our equipment, and
Yeah.
know it well.
Yeah. You sound like a preacher when you say that. That's exactly right. Pat? Exactly right. everyone knows that shot placement is very, very important. You know, you can kill a bull moose with a .22 rifle if you hit it right. You know, you can kill it with a very small weapon. You could also shoot something. You could shoot a squirrel with a .300 Winchester and not kill it if you hit it in the wrong place. You it's some of you that doesn't mean anything to you, but others get it. But shot placement makes a huge difference as to where you hit something versus that. And that's the way with that stone. I mean, you can get hit by 100 stones if they don't hit the right place, and all you'll be sore. But one stone in the right spot, and that's where God's help comes in, and that's where the real story is.
Use that same logic, then why even take a slingshot at all?
Well, true. I mean, you could have, knocked him over with a puff of wind, but still, there's a
Or let God.
yeah. But there was something else being accomplished there, and God was wanting David to be king. And David, when you walked off that battlefield that day, there was an obvious king among them. There was a God among them, and there was an individual present that was fit to be king. Andy?
He told Saul, when Saul offered the armor, he said, I've killed a lion and a bear, and I've taken the lamb out of the lion's mouth, and I've taken the jaw of the bear and taken the lamb.
Right.
Now, do you suppose Saul could have seen God's act in that, preserving him as a shepherd boy?
He could very well have. He convinced him
And then
to let him do it.
now God definitely was in the
Right.
life of David and was the man that was
Right.
the neighbor.
Right. The last one is in the difference of Saul's statement when he's found to have sinned, and David's statement. The difference in those two statements is Saul said he sinned or transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and David said he had sinned against the Lord. The difference is David took it personally and pointed it personally. He recognized his sin was against God, not just a commandment that God had made. And that shows a taking ownership. It's the difference between being sorry because you've harmed your relationship with God and being sorry because you got caught. That's the kind of the difference that's there. Okay, the puzzle. Paula Hamilton is our individual there that was in there this week. If you want to turn in a puzzle Sunday, or I guess I even had one turned in Wednesday night last week. You can do it on Wednesday night, just not the next Wednesday because I have to do the puzzle before Wednesday night. So do it Sunday, and I can get it and put your name in the drawing. Thank you.